There are moments in life that split your story into two halves: the person you were before, and the person you become after. This is a story about one of those moments. A story about humiliation, heartbreak, and the kind of quiet revenge that doesn't involve shouting or scenes, the kind that changes your entire life. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened to me on a Friday night, in front of 40 people, at a restaurant I'll never forget. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone you loved, if you've ever wondered whether silence is a weakness or a weapon, stay with me until the end. Because what I did after that night didn't just fix my pride. It rebuilt my entire life from the ground up. Let's start from the beginning. 3 years before that night, I met a woman I'll call Elena. We met at a friend's birthday party. She was sharp, funny, ambitious, the kind of person who filled a room just by walking into it. I was quieter, more reserved, the guy who worked hard behind the scenes and didn't need attention to feel like he mattered. For the first year, things were good. Really good. We built a life together: small apartment, inside jokes, weekend routines. I worked as a mid-level project coordinator at a logistics company, nothing glamorous, but steady. Elena worked in marketing, and she was good at it, good enough that she started climbing fast, moving in circles with people who had more money, more polish, more of everything that gets mistaken for worth. Somewhere around year 2, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A joke here about my boring job. A comment there about how I never really had ambition. She started comparing me, not always out loud, but I could feel it, to her new co-workers, her new friends, the kind of men who wore expensive watches and talked about stock portfolios at dinner parties. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she still loved me, that this was just her being stressed, being tired, being human. I made excuses for her the way people do when they're too invested to see clearly. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't understand then: contempt doesn't arrive all at once. It leaks in, drop by drop, until one day it floods the room. I kept working. I kept trying. I picked up extra shifts, started a side project I believed in, tried to prove to her, and maybe to myself, that I was worth staying with. But you cannot prove your worth to someone who has already decided you don't have any. It was her co-worker's engagement dinner. A private room at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place with candlelight and a menu that doesn't list prices. Elena had insisted I come. "Meet my work friends," she said. Finally. I remember feeling hopeful that night, like maybe this was her trying to bring me into her world instead of pushing me out of it. I wore my best jacket. I brought a bottle of wine as a gift for the couple. I smiled, shook hands, made small talk with people whose jobs paid more in a month than I made in 3. Then someone asked what I did for a living. I answered honestly. Logistics coordination. Not the most exciting answer at a table full of marketing directors and startup founders, but an honest one. There was a pause, the kind of pause that tells you something is coming. Elena laughed. Not a warm laugh. A performance laugh, aimed at the table, not at me. "He likes to say coordinator," she said, swirling her wine, "but really he just moves boxes around on a spreadsheet. It's fine, someone has to do it." A few people chuckled, unsure whether it was a joke or an insult. I felt my face go hot. I tried to laugh along, tried to make a joke back, something to defuse it. But she wasn't finished. "Honestly," she continued, louder now, looking around the table like she was performing for an audience, "I don't even know why I'm still with someone who doesn't have goals. I keep waiting for him to want more, but I think this, she gestured vaguely toward me, is just it. This is the ceiling. The table went quiet. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Someone else suddenly became very interested in their bread plate. I sat there, wine glass in hand, feeling like the walls of that private dining room had turned into a stage, and I was the punchline everyone was too polite to laugh at out loud. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my napkin down and storm out like people do in movies. I just sat there, quiet, absorbing it, while 30-something faces looked anywhere but at me. That silence, my silence, is something I've thought about 1,000 times since. In that moment, it felt like weakness. Later, I would understand it was the first brick in something much bigger. I don't remember much of the car ride home. I remember Elena talking, explaining, saying I was too sensitive, that it was just a joke, that I was embarrassing her by being upset about it. I remember nodding along, because that's what I always did. I absorbed, I adjusted, I made myself smaller so the relationship could stay intact. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, doing something I hadn't done in a long time, actually thinking, clearly, about my life. Not the version of my life filtered through her opinion of me. The real one. I thought about how long I had shrunk myself to fit into a relationship that only had room for one person's ambitions. I thought about the side project I'd shelved because she called it a hobby, not a career. I thought about the friends I'd drifted from because she found them unimpressive. I thought about how, somewhere in 3 years, I had stopped asking what I wanted and started only asking what would keep the peace. Humiliation has a strange side effect. It's supposed to make you feel small. But if you sit with it long enough, without running from it, it can also make you painfully clear-eyed. That night, I wasn't just hurt. I was awake, maybe for the first time in years. I didn't make a decision that night. I want to be honest about that. There was no dramatic monologue, no slamming of doors. Just a quiet, cold clarity settling over me like frost. Something had ended at that dinner table, even if neither of us had said it out loud yet. 2 weeks passed. Elena never apologized, not really. She offered a version of "I'm sorry you felt that way," which, if you've ever received one, you know is not an apology at all. It's a mirror held up to make your reaction the problem instead of her words. I spent those 2 weeks doing something I hadn't done in a long time, making lists. Not to-do lists, life lists. What did I actually want? Not what would impress her friends, not what would earn her approval, but what I, alone, wanted to build. I realized I had been quietly good at something for years without ever taking it seriously. I'd been teaching myself supply chain software and automation tools in my spare time, the boring spreadsheet stuff Elena mocked at that dinner. What she saw as unglamorous, I began to see differently, a skill set that companies were desperate for and paid extremely well for, if you specialized deep enough. I made a decision. Not a decision to get revenge, not yet. A decision to stop performing smallness. I signed up for an advanced certification course in supply chain analytics that I'd been eyeing for a year but never pursued because it cost money and time I always convinced myself I didn't have. I set a plan, 6 months of disciplined, unglamorous work. Early mornings before my job, weekends instead of dinners out, saying no to distractions. I told Elena I needed to focus on a certification for work. She barely reacted, a shrug, a sure, whatever helps. She had no idea that the man she'd humiliated in front of her friends had quietly decided to become someone she no longer recognized. The relationship didn't survive the shift, but not for the reason you'd expect. It wasn't a dramatic fight. It was something quieter and, honestly, More powerful, I simply stopped needing her approval. Elena noticed the change before I even said anything. I stopped flinching at her jabs. I stopped over-explaining myself. I started spending my evenings studying instead of sitting through her complaints about co-workers I'd never met. One night, about 2 months after the dinner, she looked at me and said, almost accusingly, "You're different lately." Distant. I told her the truth. I told her that the night at that dinner had shown me something I couldn't unsee, that I had spent years trying to be enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't, and that I was done doing that. She didn't cry. She didn't fight for it. In some strange way, I think she'd already emotionally left long before that dinner, and the public humiliation was just the moment it leaked out where everyone could see it. We ended things within the week. No screaming, no dramatic scenes. Just two people admitting, finally, that whatever we had built didn't have a foundation strong enough to hold either of us up. I moved into a small studio apartment across town. It was smaller, quieter, cheaper. And for the first time in years, it was entirely, completely mine. The next year became the most disciplined stretch of my life. I finished the certification in 4 months, ahead of schedule. I used it to negotiate a transfer into a specialized analytics role at my company, the kind of role Elena's co-workers would have called impressive without a hint of irony. I didn't stop there. With the extra income and the confidence that came from actually finishing something hard, I started freelance consulting on the side, helping small businesses streamline their supply chains. What started as a few $100 extra a month turned into a second income stream within a year. I started training at the gym near my new apartment, not out of vanity, but because for years I'd let my body become an afterthought, just like everything else about myself. I reconnected with the friends Elena had once called unimpressive and found out, unsurprisingly, that they were some of the most genuinely supportive people in my life. None of this happened overnight, and none of it happened because I was chasing revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think this is the part people misunderstand about stories like mine. I wasn't building a better life to prove Elena wrong. I was building it because, for the first time, I was finally asking what I wanted instead of what would keep someone else from being disappointed in me. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small, quiet satisfaction in becoming exactly the kind of person she once said I'd never be. Almost exactly a year and a half after that dinner, I ran into Elena at an industry networking event, one of those irritating coincidences that real life seems to specialize in. She was there representing her marketing firm. I was there representing my growing consulting practice, now with 3 employees and a client list I was genuinely proud of. She didn't recognize me at first. I'd changed not just physically, though that was part of it, but in the way I carried myself. When she realized who I was, I watched something shift across her face, surprise, then something that looked almost like discomfort. We talked for a few minutes, polite and stiff. She asked what I was doing now. I told her, simply, without performing for the room the way she once had. No gloating, no dramatic reveal. Just the truth, stated plainly. I run my own consulting firm now. Things are good. She mentioned, almost too quickly, that things with her had been complicated, a relationship that ended badly, a job that hadn't gone the way she'd hoped. I didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer many. There was no triumphant speech, no scene where I listed everything she'd said at that dinner table and made her apologize for each one. Real life doesn't usually give you that kind of clean, cinematic justice. What it gave me instead was quieter and, honestly, more satisfying, the simple, undeniable fact that I no longer needed anything from her. Not her approval, not her apology, not even her acknowledgement of how far I'd come. I excused myself, wished her well, and walked back into a room full of people who saw me exactly as I now saw myself. I've thought a lot about that night at the dinner table, the version of me who sat there in silence while people avoided my eyes. For a long time, I thought that silence made me weak. I understand it differently now. The real revenge was never about proving Elena wrong. It was about refusing to let someone else's careless words become the ceiling of my life. Humiliation only becomes permanent damage if you let it define who you decide to become afterward. Left alone, it festers. Used as fuel, it can rebuild you into someone the old version of you wouldn't recognize. If you're listening to this and you've ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you, I want you to hear this clearly: their opinion of your ceiling was never the truth. It was only ever a reflection of how small they needed you to be to feel comfortable. You don't need a dramatic confrontation to reclaim your life. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply becoming so undeniably whole that the people who once diminished you become a footnote in a story that's actually about you. That's my story. Not a story of shouting matches or dramatic ultimatums, but of quiet, deliberate rebuilding, the kind that actually lasts. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to make you feel small, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more where this came from. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never let anyone else decide the size of the life you're allowed to live.